Right, we're gonna get back into the swing of things. We're moving now on to item number 8.2, found on page 57 of the report. Big discussion for our community around housing. We've got a number of people here today. I'm going to hand it over to Natasha to walk us through, and then obviously supporting staff around that as well. Welcome to others that are joining us. Steve here today as well. So over to you, Natasha. Sorry, and just as Natasha kicks it off, there will be responses to some of the comments from our public speaker, and then some of those discussions are better had for another day around the PC2 plan changes, but Natasha will talk to that.
Thank you very much. And I do feel that, for starters, I should apologise for being the reason why. So you had so many pages in your agenda this morning. I think I'm responsible for about 3/4 of them. So please forgive me. Thank you very much. I do have 2 reports here. I'll speak to the housing needs assessment one and then take questions and stuff on that before we then get on to the housing strategy report. We do have with me here Steve Flood down the back, who many of you will recall has been instrumental in getting this housing needs assessment work underway and to the point where we are now. We also have joining us online Natalie Allen from the Urban Advisory, Ian Mitchell from Livingston Associates, and Chris Gladell from Community Housing Aotearoa, who collectively have been the researchers who have put a huge amount of work and effort into completing the needs assessments in the 2 reports. So I do have some introductory comments, and I will be taking the reports as read. But before I get on to those, I did just want to touch on to a few of the comments made by the speaker this morning. As the chair has alluded to, there are a range of his comments and concerns which are better addressed through following conversations that will be happening over the next while in relation to Plan Change 2 to the district plan, rather than through the housing strategy. He did mention some concerns about development, particularly in the Waikanae coastal area, which he has spoken to previously, and the concern that the medium density residential standards will be enabling larger, higher houses. Just in relation to that coastal areas, I did just want to remind elected members that the draft plan change does include a qualifying matter which seeks to retain existing plan provisions in a defined coastal area until the Takatai Kāpiti process is completed. That's the appropriate process for considering how we deal with coastal matters and level of development in that areas. The other point that he made was around the concerns that those provisions will result in an increasing number of large mentions, I think was what he called, and 3 stories on individual sections. I'd just like to point to overall trends in New Zealand which indicate smaller house sizes are becoming the norm, and that's a national trend and is primarily driven by affordability. It was nice to hear the speaker acknowledge the significance of housing issues, and particularly in social housing in the district. Climate change was the 3rd matter that I heard him raise, particularly with concerns about sustainability and resilience. I would just like to point out that it is covered in the housing strategy. So we do have sustainability and resilience mentioned in a principle to the housing strategy, and there is also an objective which talks to this point and highlights that urban planning needs to protect vulnerable areas, including due to hazards. So I will now, I believe that covers most of the points in relation to the speaker this morning, so I will turn back to my other comments. The guests that we do have online, plus Steve here, are able to answer any questions that you might have at the appropriate time in relation to the technical content of the reports, and I'm very grateful for the work that they have done to get us to this point. I'm also very grateful for the many parties who have contributed to this work, the people in the community who responded to the survey, the people who were involved in focus groups and more in-depth discussions with the researchers, and iwi who have been undertaking their own research, which is also fed into the needs assessment. It's been a significant undertaking, and there's been really great engagement from the community and our stakeholders, and that shows the level of interest and concern about this topic. The completion of the housing needs assessment has added to the quality and robustness of information available for us to use, and it's already shown its value and has been helpful in conversations that we've been having with central government agencies, and it means that these conversations can be much more targeted in terms of articulating what and where particular needs are, and what might help from their point of view as well, how they might be able to help us address the issues we've got in our community. It gives us a really strong evidence base for taking our housing work forward. Right back when the property group housing assessment report was undertaken, it had identified a housing needs assessment as a priority piece of work. We knew then already that there were significant and growing issues locally, but it was needed. We needed to have more to convince others who are fundamental in playing a role in our response to the challenges. And particularly that was important when at that time government agencies that we were having conversations with didn't really feel that there was an issue in Kāpiti that needed to be addressed. We've managed to turn that around with the conversations that we've been having. So now we do have a solid evidence and a foundation to contribute to these ongoing government discussions to get better coordination and investment from them. There is a wealth of information contained in the reports. As many of you will recall, there was a council workshop on the content of the material that you've got before you today in late April, which gave an overview of the findings. It does make for sobering reading. The reality of the situation for many of our residents is grim. Ōtaki is highlighted as an area of the highest housing need, but there are still pockets of issues elsewhere too. The reports collectively give us a much better understanding of need across different communities within Kāpiti as well as Kāpiti as a whole than what we had before, and we've used this as a starting point for targeting our response. In terms of what we need to do next, we have ensured that there is strong alignment from the housing needs assessment to the housing strategy, and we've used this information to shape what we do about the issues. The intention is that this housing needs assessment is a public documents, and we want it to be widely accessible for anyone with an interest in housing in Kāpiti, and we will be sharing it widely. So just to delve into that a little bit further, we have got a detailed comms approach planned. This does include a range of different avenues for ensuring this is shared widely. So we have got a media advisory which will be going out today. There is updated web content, including video content, which is being prepared, that will accompany the reports online. We will also be using newsletters, including Everything Kāpiti and the Economic Development Business newsletter to help spread word of this information being available now and what we're doing about it. And we'll also be promoting it through social media channels and direct emails to interested parties, including the participants in this in the work that we've done here, where that's feasible to do so. The last component of it I wanted to touch on was that we are developing content for our local papers as well to do a spread there, to share some of the key findings and build awareness of the reports. So I think I'll stop there for now, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I just want to double check in terms of the housing portfolio holder, whether now is a time that you would like to add a bit in terms of the work that's been done around the report, or whether we want to open it up for questions. Did you have anything further to add, Rob, before we, as portfolio holder, and obviously done a lot of work in this space?
I'm happy to leave that for
that's great.
The speeches and just ask some questions.
Okay.
The very, very long speeches that Wynne and I have been working on.
Rob has been, Councillor McCann has been clearly practising a speech last night in front of the mirror. We'll get to see that in a few minutes if you'll wait in anticipation. Look, in all seriousness, I think there is the need for a good, robust discussion around the table around this issue. So I am going to allow the discussion to go on, but I do ask that elected members, both online and in person, keep their questions concise, keep their debate for debate, and then hopefully we can get through a number of questions. I've got a number myself as well, and so I want to try and keep the discussion moving and to be helpful and healthy. And so with that, now can I just clarify, we're taking questions regarding the assessment or both documents in terms of the research report and
just the assessment?
Just the assessment, just so that's very clear to elected members. I've got first up Councillor Compton.
Thank you. Through the chair, a nice simple question to kick things off. In terms of a searchable PDF version of the assessment, is that going to be made available on our website after we've adopted it today? Just because there's like the depth of information is amazing in here, but trying to search for the specific part of it in the PDF when it's in the format that we've got either online or there is a bit tricky at the moment. So
I found the same as well, and I appreciate in terms of the program we use for this, but I think it's a good point.
Yes, so there will be PDFs available online. We are also looking at the video I mentioned is going to be a video which pulls out some of the key data and does a bit of a summary of it, so people can get the key facts in a shorter, punchier way as well. But there is a real challenge in terms of the scale of information in here. It is really difficult for people to digest. So we have been thinking as well about how we can break things down to make it easier for people to find the information they might be particularly interested in. But it's a challenge. Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor McCann.
Thank you. I'm really impressed by what you've said about the communications, because that would have been my normal first question: is how do we ensure that we're bringing the community along? So I can't ask that, but in the communications plan, I assume this spans over a period of time that I'll let you speak to that.
Yes, it will be. So there is some initial stuff. So obviously getting the web content up, the documents online and the media advisory out are going to be things that will be done primarily today and tomorrow. Some of the other things, such as the newspaper content I talked about, will be happening more closely to the end of the month, and there'll be other opportunities as we move forward to continue to use the material. So there's other pieces of work as we deliver some of the actions on the strategy and progress that work. We will be referring back to the key data from here as well. So we want to bring it in and make it part of the ongoing conversation we're having about housing.
Cool. I wondered if you might tell us what the surprises were for staff as they looked through the data.
Not quite sure where to start.
Clearly,
with that question.
Clearly, Rob didn't line that question up with Natasha before the meeting.
No. So I think there is some of the stuff in the quantitative report that has been particularly useful to draw out has been some of the more localised challenges are, like the comparisons in terms of some of the different pockets in our community, some of the vulnerable sectors. There were a few surprises in there, but not a lot. There was in the qualitative report, there is some really interesting data in there in terms of the links with wellbeing and the flow-on implications of, if you don't get that housing right as a foundation, the in some cases lifelong implications it can have for people down the chain, and the extent of the issues. So the scale in terms of affordability, it is not just people who are low income who are facing challenges in housing. It is people who would ordinarily be considered to be reasonably well off and reasonably well established professional people who are also really struggling in this space. And so it's not just a social housing or an emergency housing issue. It's spreading out further up that housing continuum that there needs to be some action taken on.
Thank you. I think that's really illuminating. Given the information is current now, and one of our aims is to be able to use this to lobby those who can invest in housing, how long is this information going to remain current, and what are we going to do to update it?
Yeah. So it is. You're absolutely right. It is a snapshot. However, there is some of the information, because it shows trends over time, and that will still continue to be useful for some period of time. Obviously, there are a range of other factors which can play into things like house prices in terms of the increasing interest rates and things like that. There's a lot happening in the space which can influence it. It's such a comprehensive piece of work. It's not the sort of thing I would recommend redoing on an annual basis, or even 2 or 3 yearly. I think it's something that you'd probably want to revisit maybe in 5 years or 10 years in terms of the comprehensiveness. However, when we get to the housing strategy, I'll talk a bit more about the measures and what we can do to actually have, we've identified some key indicators we can use to track how things are going and whether or not they're going in the right direction over time probably on an annual basis.
And just one final communication, Mr. Chair, question is, with your departure, and I know not everything relies on you, are you confident that Council is going to be able to continue to lobby government and try and ensure that we've got the connections throughout the machinery that is government to get change?
Yes, absolutely. So those conversations are with agencies like Kāinga and Ministry of Housing and Urban Development are happening on an ongoing basis, and absolutely that will continue once I leave these fair shores.
Even better if she's the contact person, I'm just saying.
Can we have your new contact number? Thank you very much for answering those questions. Much appreciated.
Your Worship, the Mayor.
Previously, MSD's housing register has been the benchmark of needs assessment. All the other government agencies dealing with housing have always used that, and this has been an obstacle for us. I think early on the Housing Task Force recognized the needs assessment as be the priority project that we need to do. Did I catch you rightly that the assessment that we've done has turned this around? That's the choice of word that you use. Can you describe the impact of this turn this around in terms of our ability to convince the government agencies now? Is that happening? So
yes. So what some of this work has done has reinforced what we already suspected, which was the MSD data on people on the housing register didn't uncover the full scale of need within our district. There have been a number of different forums where we've been able to draw out the key facts and key information from this report and use it to reinforce with the conversations with government agencies why we wanted them to be more involved here. And we have had active conversations with organisations like Kāinga about their investment in Kāpiti, and they are actively looking at property here because they recognise the need for them to invest further in Kāpiti to help address the challenges that we're facing.
Right, I don't see any further names up on the screen, and I'm sure there are people that want to ask questions, so get your names up. I'm just going to see whether there's anyone online in the meantime that has any questions. No, I can't see any hands up there. So Councillor Pravanov up next.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, thank you, Natasha, for putting this together and presenting us with this report today. And it does, provide, some quite sobering information. But one thing that I've raised this before, is that, unless I've missed it, there doesn't appear to be anything in the report about the rest home sector versus, I suppose, more public housing. And I suppose when you look at some of the statistics, when they're looking at single people living in a single person living in a house, as well as couples, in some areas those are particularly high, and it will be really interesting to know whether or not that does relate to the rest home sector, and by actually dividing it up, it actually probably gives a better picture about, I suppose, what is left or the other part of it. And so that's my first question.
Can I just clarify with your first question?
Yes.
Because having read the report last night and the days before, given the size of it, there was a category on rest homes, and there was a table with the costs, the occupancies and so forth. So
yes.
Could you maybe narrow down your question to help staff?
There's two graphs. Hold on.
I guess, essentially what you think is missing, because the report does speak to rest homes.
Yes, for example, on page 26 of the report, which is page 87 in the agenda today, that's the first one.
And so what's the specific question around what's missing?
Yeah, so basically clarifying what percentage of that actually relates to the rest home sector versus the other part of, I suppose, what we're looking at. So basically people can go into rest homes, but the other part is people going into more private accommodation, whether it's actually buying or renting. So that's that one.
I'll check with Natasha on that one first, and we can come to your second one.
Yeah.
And Natasha, if it's detailed and you want to come back offline, feel free to do so.
Thank you. Are you specifically talking about in the plus 65 age group, are you, Councillor Pravanov?
So that was the other graph I was looking at. So there's two graphs. One is actually the age demographics. The other one is whether it's actually families, single residents, or whether it's actually couples only. And those two stick up like sore thumbs in some areas, and in particular in Waikanae where there's a lot of rest homes. And I'm just wondering what percentage of those numbers relate to that sector.
Yeah. Look, that might be a question for me to throw to Chris or Ian, given it's a reasonably detailed question from your report.
Yeah, thanks for that. I assume you mean by rest homes, you mean retirement village units rather than rest home beds?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Obviously, one of the growth areas on the Kāpiti coast is people aged, or households with people aged 65 and over, and they're predominantly one and couple only households. The people going into the retirement villages are typically people with capital who are selling a dwelling and using that capital to finance their shift into a type of owner occupation effectively, albeit they have to pay a weekly fee to the operator for the underlying operating costs of the village. So and although they may not have a lot of income, and some from time to time they do struggle to pay the ongoing weekly fees, they tend not to fall in the housing need category. But the older households that do tend to have need-related issues are those that have perhaps retired and still have a substantial mortgage. They tend to have an affordability rather than a need issue. And then older renters whose incomes are less than $50,000 per year, who find that who predominantly would be paying somewhere between 40 and 50% of their income in rent.
So thank you for that. So I suppose my question is, what percentage of those people who don't have housing needs, that's all been wrapped up into that data because they're going into retirement accommodation?
Look, I can respond to that, but I would need to do some calculations from the data.
So, Councillor Pravanov, could I suggest with that one, because I think it is getting to be a little bit tricky to understand the exact intent of the question, is flick it through by email. If you can just explain it through and get it through to the team, and then they can pass it on, and then you can get a response offline.
Okay, so thank you. So I had a second question. So, I see that in some situations the graphs are divided into five main areas, the five main residential areas and then one rural area. But I suppose within each of those areas, there are often quite different, needs, and I think it's actually a bit tricky. Well, it's probably a bit. It's not actually providing some of those areas that really do need or have concerns more than other areas. So, is there any possibility of having those areas divided into mainly maybe the town areas and the beach areas, for example?
So we've stuck to data sources based on information that's available from Statistics New Zealand. There are some of the maps in the report do break it down further, so you can see some data that is broken down a bit further than that. If you've got specific questions about particular areas, then again, it's probably best for us to deal with those offline.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I don't see any other names up on the screen, so I'm going to chop through some of my ones. So did you have some? Okay. On page 133 of the council report, which is 72 of the assessment, it refers to the lack of through traffic through Ōtaki, obviously as a result of the bypass, and a negative impact on employment. Appreciate that the document is largely around needs assessment as opposed to economics, but equally people will use the document for a range of purposes. Were the authors of the report aware of the economic impact assessment done on Ōtaki in the Copeland-Brown report, which does actually state that the increased growth there will largely mitigate the effects from the loss of traffic?
So that wasn't something that was specifically provided to the authors. I'm not sure whether, again, Chris or Ian want to make a comment about whether or not that was something that they had.
Well, if not, I just wondered whether that could be capsulated, and I imagine the report can be tweaked if there are areas that need tweaking.
We could certainly add a reference into that other report to look at those impacts and replace that information with the summary of those economic impacts that were modelled.
Thank you. And I guess essentially what I'm asking is for you to have a look at the report. You may decide after reading it that the wording is as it is fit, or you may decide that it needs some modification. That's all I'm asking. In terms of I just want to check out on page 132 of your report, 193 of our report. There's a table there, and I'm assuming these tables come straight out of the report. And on the table under 9.23, it references July 2010. Just checking that's potentially a typo and it should be 2020. And I'm only raising that in case it's actually left in the report that goes public.
This is 193 in our agenda.
So 193 in our agenda, 132 in the report. Emergency housing special need grants. I can just leave that there if you guys just want to double check that.
That. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
Table 9.23?
Correct.
2017 to 2021.
I see the bottom line on that table. It says 1 July 2010. That's a bit, isn't it?
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, apologies. That is a typo.
Sorry, I wasn't able to add notes to this. I'm not using my own PC, and it was a little bit challenging to work with this. So there was another one there around. So on page 149 of the document 210 of our council report, it refers to essentially summarising. It just says that our older persons housing units break even. My understanding was that they were subsidised. And again, just in terms of the accuracy of the report
Yes, they are subsidised. We will get that corrected.
Thank you. And then on page 152 of the report, 213 of our document, again, I struggled to put some notes here. So I think what I was marking this one for was around what appeared to me, and forgive me if I've got this wrong, because obviously it was quite a meaty document. There wasn't as much mention around the portacoms, the self-contained units that have been put on site, and also tiny homes. I don't think there's probably a person in the room that doesn't know someone that's plonked something in their street or in a family member. So does the report, am I missing something? Does it actually refer to those additional dwellings? I know it refers to council supporting them in the recommendations, but I can think of at least 3 or 4 just within my close circle of people that have put those little rentable portacoms on their properties.
Again, Chris and Ian, do one of you want to tackle that question?
I don't believe in the data that we had received. It had information on the numbers, and it would be whether those went through the formal consenting process or whether they are truly temporary, in which there would be no.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It's not a
data
criticism.
in record.
Yeah. It's not a criticism of the work that you guys do. I think it's a fantastic report, but I wonder whether it is a gap in terms of our knowledge of how many additional units are actually popping up throughout the district.
Yeah, so I guess if it doesn't go through a consenting process, it's difficult for there to be any statistical record of it. Natalie, given that on the qualitative report and the survey reports, how was this topic covered off in that? Did it come up as a significant thing?
No, I actually thought that people might discuss it more and kind of some of their preferences and also in the focus groups, but it didn't actually arise as a critical issue that people seem to be considering. That's not to say that it's not prevalent, but it also could be that if they're not consented items, people weren't really willing to put that in their responses. So you'd actually need to do, I guess, an audit to confirm that information. So I
guess thank you for the response. I guess my concern isn't so much about whether the data was captured, because I understand the responses around possibly why they couldn't be, but whether the report actually just identifies the fact that that the authors are aware that this is occurring within the district and probably will continue to occur. I don't know about others around the table, but they're popping up everywhere. And I don't know, it just doesn't really mention much of it in the report.
No, I mean, I guess that's where, if it hasn't come up through the statistical data, that was the source of information for the quantitative report, and if it wasn't something that was really mentioned in the information, in terms of the research information that Natalie received from the people she was talking to, that'll be why it's not, we can't really add it into the report if it's not something that came up through the research.
Thanks, Natasha. Page 157, 218 of the council report. Look, this is just around it recommends that the council engages with Kāinga Ora, Ministry of Housing and Urban Development and so forth. It almost infers that we're not, and I'm wondering whether we're comfortable with that statement for people reading it, because I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but there's been a lot of discussion there within the team. Yeah,
there is. Look, in the as an appendix to the next paper, I do pick up the recommendations that come through in these two reports and talk about how they're addressed in the strategy.
Thank you. I'm almost done, team. Page 157 of the document, 218 again. It has a sentence there. It says, "Of them has received inquiries." So just again, I obviously haven't reviewed this prior to coming through our report, but again, that sentence there doesn't make sense.
Apologies for that. We can address that.
Thank you. And that's all from me on this one. I've got some just around the next section. But again, great work, team. The report is just, although sobering, it is incredibly impressive in terms of the rich information that it holds. Last call for any questions from councillors around the table. And online, I don't see any. So we'll go back to the recommendations on page 57, and I understand His Worship the Mayor, no, I'm just kidding, Councillor McCann wants to move those recommendations. Thank you. Will we have a seconder? Councillor Halliday, thank you. And so now your shining opportunity for a right of introduction. Yes. Councillor McCann.
Thank you for that introduction and causing my heart to palpitate after spending weeks writing this speech. So just in case you're taking me seriously, I've jotted down some notes that I think are important to mention. And one is to reiterate our thanks to the community for sharing some of this information with us, especially in the qualitative report. And also our thanks to Natasha and especially Steve Flood, both of whom we're losing in council, and both of whom will be a significant loss. I'd also like to note, for those people who are listening, the reason I think there aren't hundreds of questions is the awesome work by staff in the fulsome briefings that we've had and the workshops that have gone through this work so that we understand it. I think it's worth reiterating that there has been a perception that Kāpiti is a wealthy community. That perception has existed within government and their various departments, and His Worship the Mayor brought up one of the ways in which Kāinga Ora measured the demand in our community through those waiting lists. And I can remember a meeting with the Mayor and Kāinga Ora where they admitted that that waiting list no longer represented the need in our community because there was so little movement in our social housing that people simply didn't bother to go on the waiting list because it was that bad. These reports fill in the gaps within government knowledge that has led over decades to chronic underfunding in social housing, especially within our region. So these quantitative and qualitative reports underscore that need in a way that we hope that government departments will be able to understand, that staff and councillors will be able to speak to those in positions of power to make significant decisions. There's a couple of things that are really worth pulling out, and you'll see those in the media reports. 1 in 5 people in Kāpiti have skipped a meal, delayed paying essential bills, or borrowed from family and friends because of housing and living costs. And when we look at the price increases over the last 20 years of 435%, a chunk of that is housing costs. 1 in 4 private renters are severely stressed, paying more than 50% of their household income in rent. And one of the distressing things, but the important things to note, is it's not just housing that becomes the problem, it's that domino effect that those reports talk to, and then our strategy will again reiterate that it affects the well-being of everyone who is involved in that family as they have to forego heating, going to the doctor, proper food, having to move from house to house, change schools. The domino effect on our community is awful. And we now know that also that this problem is not just one that affects those of us who are not wealthy. It is also affecting the next generation who are unable to get on the housing ladder. So these reports, which I recommend that we accept, and of course acknowledge the significant contribution from iwi, I recommend that we do that because they will help us to create the opportunity and the discussions with government for proper investing. And they've also helped us inform our strategy. So with that, I'll leave part 1 of my speech concluded.
And with that, I have to admit that I've made an unintended little bit of a blunder. Well, maybe I haven't. I've just been checking with Natasha. We've gone through and talked about the actual the first part of the report. I didn't really check to see whether there were any questions or any comments from Natasha around the other part of the report. The was it living well? I'm just trying to remember That's right. Not just. And so, did you want to add any commentary to that before? I mean, we can pause in terms of the recommendation being put.
So I didn't specifically have any other additional comments to add on that, but happy, and we've got Natalie online if there are any questions. Hopefully we still might have her online. Any questions specifically about that report, happy to take them.
Yeah, so not just a house, a life, was there any questions relating to that particular document? Because I didn't actually open that up and ask for questions there, and they are captured both in the same recommendations that Councillor McCann has just moved and we've seconded. So as Chair, I can pause it there and we can open it up. No. And Councillor Elliott, your light's on, but that will just be for debate. Okay, so I actually did, and that's what reminded me, because I had a couple of annotated boxes here that I'll take these ones offline actually, team, because they are more editorial now that I look at them. And I'll save what I was going to say in one part there for debate. So that we can just move on there. So next up, we've got Councillor Compton.
Thank you. So much like my colleague, Councillor McCann, I've been constantly banging the drum around the need for us to tackle this housing catastrophe that we're experiencing here in Kāpiti. And as has been mentioned several times, the housing needs assessment, it paints a really sobering picture about the reality on the ground for our community and our whānau. What it details is how grossly unaffordable housing, both in terms of home ownership and rental affordability, is driving societal outcomes that I believe that no one around this table would find acceptable. Whether that's overcrowding, whether that's housing costs driving people out of our community, away from their whānau and their support networks, from social support services, from economic opportunities, or at the very worst, it's forcing people into extreme poverty and, in many cases, into homelessness. As we know here in Kāpiti, we're caught between twin fires, and that's that our average income is lower than the national average, but our average housing costs are significantly higher than the national average. And Table 8.2, I think, is really the tip of the iceberg around this. And it shows that even Kāpiti's more affordable housing, so that's the lower quartile, it's become significantly more expensive over the past 2 decades. And that's even with, if you're looking to purchase, that's even with home loan interest rates having hit historic lows in the past few years. If you go on to Table 8.2, you'll get that painted in even more stark detail. And it shows that 60 or more than 60% of our renters can't even afford the lower quartile rent of $432 a week, let alone the median rent of $505 a week. And that's 2/3 of renters can't afford, or more than 2/3 of renters can't afford that, which is just an incredible figure that should really weigh heavily on all of our shoulders. And when you go over to the next page, and you know, home ownership has been the great Kiwi dream for generations. But actually, I think we can conclusively say that's actually out the window for most people in Kāpiti now, or most renters in Kāpiti now. Because if you look at that table, the lower quartile house price at $696,000, 88% of renters could not afford to buy a house at that price, given their incomes. That is something that I am deeply ashamed of for Kāpiti. I think that is us having failed, and it's not just Kāpiti, I should be fair, it's actually Aotearoa as a country. We have failed our social contract to our people that we have let housing become this unaffordable, but it's especially acute here in Kāpiti. Now, as is mentioned in this report, a lot of it is driven by people who are moving into our district. So we're not necessarily, well, the report shows that we don't have natural population growth. That's to be expected. We have a generally skewing older population. But what we have is a lot of people, predominantly from Wellington, who want to move here. Now, I know a lot of people think they can do something about that, but here's the news, tough luck, you can't. You can't stop people wanting to move to Kāpiti. The same reasons that you choose to live here is exactly the same reason that other people want to live here. It's actually the same reason, you know, my wife, she was born and bred here, but the opportunities here, the lifestyle, just slightly better weather than Wellington, those are all reasons that people want to come and live here. And we can't fundamentally change those things unless we completely tank the economy and society here, and that would be an outcome that none of us want. And you can't put a giant sign up on Transmission Gully saying, sorry, we're full either. That won't work, sadly. You can't build a wall there if you wanted to channel your inner Donald Trump as well. But what we can control, and this is the power that we have around this table, is we can control how we plan to accommodate that growth in a way that allows anyone who wants to be able to call Kāpiti home, to be able to call Kāpiti home. And I think that's a dream that everyone here can actually agree to. I know that my 2 boys, Alex and Leon, who are 5 and 3 respectively, I want them to be able to afford to call Kāpiti home when it comes to them finally flying the nest, which seems like a long way away, but actually for the oldest one, it's maybe only 13 years away. And you look at what's happened over the last 2 decades. Imagine if we let those trends continue. That was something that's completely unacceptable. You know, so that unaffordability That's not a future I want for Kāpiti. The future I want for Kāpiti is for our children and our grandchildren, those future generations, to be able to afford to live here. And what this report shows is that we've got all those measures trending in the absolute wrong direction at the moment, so we need to take bold action to address that. You know, better things are possible for our community, but it's only if the decision makers who sit around tables like our one here at Council, whether they're sitting down the road there at Parliament, whether they're sitting down the road at Greater Wellington Regional Council, in fact all councils around the country as well, they all have to play their part. We all have to pull a collective weight around this. We have to have the courage of our convictions. We have to take bold steps to address this. Because whenever I hear someone saying that they don't want housing intensification in their backyard, what I'm hearing them say is that they don't want my children to be able to afford to call Kāpiti home. And I'm sorry, but that is simply not good enough. We do not want Kāpiti to become an ever more exclusive enclave that grows more and more stale because only the most affluent and privileged people in our country can afford to live here. That's not what Kāpiti is about. That's not what Aotearoa is about. We have to do better.
Thank you, Gwyn. Councillor Elliott.
I don't know if I could follow that, but I would like to thank my colleagues, Councillor Compton and Rob, for not mentioning the words Labour or National in your opening debate. Look, I want to thank staff and Councillor Rob McCann, all of you and externals. Thank you for all your work. This is indeed a valuable snapshot of the health and needs of the Kāpiti community, with a very well-defined set of directions for the council and community to follow for the future. I really hope this document is made available to guide everyone in Kāpiti for many, many years towards better home security. I'd just like to note also that I think this organisation should be incredibly proud of our 30 years of providing a heck of a lot of social housing quietly behind the scenes without any fanfare for over 30 years. It's been brilliant. And look forward to these new initiatives and creative ways to ensure that everyone in Kāpiti here has their housing needs met. This work started with the 2017 Communities Housing Task Force report, and I really want to thank everyone from way back then right up to now. Thank you. I will be supporting this.
I'm just going to go online to see whether there's any one that wants to speak and debate online. If you can just pop your hand up there. Any other councillors? I can't see any other lights up. Otherwise, I'm going to jump in. Councillor Hanford.
Oh yeah, I didn't really think I have anything to add to what Councillor Compton said, but I might as well just completely toe-took all of his words and the passion and the urgency as well that his words convey, and I think that's it's hard hitting. So it's as well as the report is Councillor Compton's words were as well, and same with Councillor McCann. So yeah, I would ask us as a table the same question. What kind of Kāpiti do we want to live in, and what kind of Kāpiti do we want to pass on? Do we want the trends that we have seen illustrated to us in that report, in the report that we've got in front of us today, the trends that people in our community were open about their stories and contributing to? I think that's the beautiful but also heartbreaking thing about what we've got in front of us right now is, yes, we've got trends, yes, we've got data, but it's a culmination of people's stories and people's realities, and many of which are pretty tough at the moment. And so, yeah, the kind of Kāpiti that we want to be a part of and pass on, I don't think we want to see anywhere near as many people doing it tough, and people deserve the right to have a roof over their head and a safe platform, an affordable platform to be able to live out their hopes and dreams and to contribute to the betterment of our community and our nation. So we all need to work together on this, and I think that's also what this has the potential to really leverage is our collaborative efforts in the housing space to avoid that domino effect continuing, where we just have further pressure on whānau, exacerbating social inequities, exacerbating intergenerational inequity as well, as Councillor Compton has very eloquently put, because we want our next generation to be able to afford to live here. That's what I want, and I think through conversations that we've had collectively, I think that's something we can all agree on. And so this is a very important first step, because I think to play our role in the solutions, we need to understand the issues, and as hard as it is to confront them, and as hard as it is to recognise that this is made up of yes people's stories, it's an extremely important thing to be aware of and for our eyes to be opened to, so that we can really pivot to what needs to be done to see our Kāpiti whānau thriving and socially connected, environmentally resilient communities where people have roofs over their head, and where that isn't a hard thing to get, where it's just something that people, no matter their age, no matter where they are in the Kāpiti coast, no matter what job they might have, or no matter how much money they might have, that they are able to have access to that basic human right.
Thanks, Sophie. Well, I'm going to go up next, and I haven't prepared or written anything, but I do want to take the opportunity to come from a slightly different angle, and what I'm going to do is actually just read a little bit out in the report. I don't mind admitting that in reading this report last night, I read it out to my wife and actually choked up in trying to read part of it. Not because it's new to me. I've dealt with this stuff through my personal life, with my church life, with as a business owner, seeing many aspects of things that I've found in this report. But equally as an elected member too, I've also dealt with varying levels of racism in my time as an elected member. Also, you'll recall when the funding was put up for Ōtaki, for social investment, and for the additional funding there for the youth space come under a bit of criticism about the support provided to Ōtaki. Yet the report very clearly identifies the high levels of deprivation and need in Ōtaki that just stick out. Not to say that there isn't pockets of it in the rest of the district, but you would struggle to show to me that Ōtaki isn't the highest impacted community within the district. I just want to read this little bit out. Not that our elected members around the table necessarily didn't read it or don't get this, but I think it's just publicly it's important to read it out to understand the hurt and also the impact that it's had on Māori. I won't read every aspect of Ngā Te Homea's piece there, but I'll read the bit that I think is pertinent to what I'm raising. It says that our tūpana Miriona Utubudge was the last of the whānau to actually live on the Wainui whenua in a house she built in 1938 for herself and her whānau. She lived on a block of around 60 acres in a strip that stretched from the coast to the foothills below Wainui Maunga. Miriona leased some of the land to local farmers, and her grandson, Carl, tells the story from his grandmother of Jack Smith walking to her house to pay his rent for the use of her land. Unfortunately, Miriona didn't get to live in this house for long. In 1942, she was forced to move when her whenua was taken under the Public Works Act to form part of the Marines camp for American troops in World War II. As some sort of compensation, Miriona and the whānau were offered several small sections around the Paikokariki village. Following the war, Miriona's house and whenua were retained by the Crown for recreational purposes. As part of what is now Queen Elizabeth Park, unable to return to her whenua, she took out a Māori Affairs loan in 1950 to build a new house on one of the smaller parcels of land that had been offered as compensation. The house has since housed 5 generations of Miriona's whānau and is still lived in by her grandson Carl. The Māori Affairs loan that Miriona took out to build the new house has grown into a 72-year mortgage, a debt that wouldn't have existed if Miriona wasn't forced to give up her original home and land. So just let that sink in for a minute for people to understand. To have 60 acres of your property taken, admittedly under the Public Works Act, and some areas different deals were done in different areas around the district and around the country. But this whānau to this day has a 72-year mortgage on a property that has housed 5 generations of their whānau, going from owning 60 acres. That for me is a pretty sobering story. It's only one of the stories within our district. But for me, it certainly speaks to the grievance that Māori have and carry when as has been explained to us by Ngā Hapu Ōtaki, for example, they can't even stay in their own rohi, in their own communities, near their own marae. So it was a pretty powerful story to me, that one. I hadn't heard that story particularly, but it does speak to the grievance that's carried around land acquisitions and the disadvantage that it puts Māori at in terms of opportunities in life moving forward. How things could have been different for that whānau if they'd been adequately compensated for the land that was taken. So for me, I think the report is incredibly impressive. As sobering as it is impressive in terms of the information that it provides. What is the challenge for this council and for Kāinga Ora and government departments is how we react to that information. And as Gwyn and as Rob and others have said, I'll quote Councillor McCann, that we are not cowards, and that we actually step up to the plate and try to right the wrongs and actually do what's right for our community and for our treaty partners as well, now and into the future. So I look forward to seeing the council make brave decisions in responding to the findings of the reports in the months and years ahead. I forgot I was chair there for a minute. Who's next? Right of reply, it looks like. So back to Councillor McCann.
Kia ora, thank you. Look, some wonderful words from my fellow councillors, which I think demonstrate their connected nature into our community, and the one thing that leaders, and we are leaders, need to always do is challenge themselves to get out of their own social circle, to get out of their own areas of wealth or well-to-doness, and find those people who are less fortunate. And these reports help us to do that, and they also demonstrate that it is such a range of our community that will be affected unless we do something. I do need to refer to Councillor Elliott's comment. It was Labor that provided loans to council in the 1970s, correct me if I haven't got my history right, to enable the building of those senior homes. But also it is National and Labor that have got together to help end the NIMBYism that councils such as ours and every other council have helped create through clauses that allow trees or gardens or anything else to be more important than housing people. So I do push back a little and say it is this council that have taken the steps that do not necessarily win members' votes, but will ensure that future generations have houses over their heads. So to reiterate the nice framing of the chair, it is bravery to do what we are doing, and it takes bravery to stick that course and continue that course. So I thank all the councillors for the work that they've done, and I thank the staff especially and the community for sharing their really personal stories at times, so that we have the evidence which will help us back the next report coming up. So thank you very much, and I recommend we receive and then acknowledge these reports.
Thank you, Rob. So page 57, recommendations A and B, moved by Councillor McCann, seconded by Councillor Halliday. And I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those online, green ticks if you support. Against, and that is carried. All right. So we're going to move now on to item number 8.3, which is the council housing strategy. And Natasha's going to walk us through that one as well. Excellent. Over to you.
Thank you to the Chair. So this next report relates to the housing strategy. And look, already in this meeting we have discussed much about the strong concerns relating to housing in our community. The long-term plan decisions that were made in that were a significant step for the council in deciding to take a bigger role in housing. As well as taking immediate actions to begin to address some of the housing issues, staff have been working on developing a more cohesive and comprehensive picture of what our housing response should be going forward and forming this into a work program, and timing the release of this with the receipt of the housing needs assessment report is a really nice duo. It is the culmination of a lot of work, and it takes on board the feedback that was received from the community on the long-term plan consultation, where we asked the community what a bigger role for council and housing should look like. So setting out what this bigger role looks like and how we're going to respond to the housing needs assessment finding has taken the shape of this housing strategy. I'm really pleased to be in a position to bring you this strategy today. It will guide council's work on housing for the next few years, and I would also like to thank the Urban Advisory, who have been fundamental in assisting us pull the strategy together, and also Ngā Hapu Ōtaki, who have been a very engaged, one of our iwi partners who's been very engaged in this work, and so I thank them for their inputs as well. So the strategy provides clarity for all about the council's role. It shapes our direction around a set of principles and objectives. It articulates a suite of actions which focus on 7 core issues and priorities which we believe can make a difference. And those 7 core issues are the quantum of new houses being built, the typology of new houses, housing affordability, social housing availability and homelessness, emergency and transitional housing, the infrastructure and service provisions to meet growth, and Māori housing. Given the role of other parties in housing, particularly around government departments, we've thought carefully about what role the council could and should be playing. There are different roles that council can fall into. We've focused this on being an enabler, being a facilitator, the work we're required to do as a regulator, and also as a service and infrastructure provider. We do need to bear in mind that we don't have all of the answers and levers to pull when it comes to addressing the many challenges we're facing in housing, but there definitely are things that we can do, and we have to play a part in helping to make a difference, including looking at where we can partner with others. So the content of the strategy draws heavily from the needs assessment in order to shape it. The information and data it has provided about the scale and extent of the problem and the variation across the district, but also the housing needs assessment reports each make some recommendations for responses and actions for council to consider going forward. These are summarised in Appendix 2 to this report, along with a commentary around how they have been addressed by the strategy. Lastly, I just wanted to touch on the sequencing. As I've mentioned in briefings, there is a lot of work to do in this area, some of which we've already got underway. We can't do everything all at once, and it does require us to be carefully looking at sequencing the work, and that includes considering the timings of things that we're required to do by government. Lastly, this housing strategy provides a really strong direction for our housing work program, and it begins to address the challenges set out in the housing needs assessment. Happy to take questions.
Thanks, Natasha. I'll kick it off actually. If you referred to the fact that it, the work that we've got underway, we're at danger of people reading the report and thinking that this is the start. Do you want to just touch on a few of the things that we've actually doing or done underway? Obviously the purchase of the land in Rangiru Road, an example that fit within the strategy that we're already.
We do.
Yeah.
Yes. So there is to touch on that one first. There is a strategic land acquisition budget set aside for housing, of which to date we have used to purchase a piece of land in Rangiru Road and Ōtaki for the purpose of housing. There is a variety of conversations we've been having with different government departments, and this traverses transitional housing, social housing, affordable housing. There is the work that we're doing as part of the Wellington Regional Leadership Group. So there is a regional housing action plan which we have contributed to and which aligns with a range of the actions and work that we already have underway. So we've been contributing to that work. There is the work that we have done coordinating with government agencies and iwi to get agreement from government to participate in a Kāpiti steering group focused on housing. That'll be a partnership between iwi and government and council. And there is some upcoming work that needs to be done in terms of setting the terms of reference for that. We've already commenced the work on Plan Change 2 to update our district plan provisions to enable more housing in different locations, including a greater level of intensity around our town centres. As part of that district plan work, we've also been working closely with iwi on some provisions to make it easier for papakainga to be developed on Māori-owned land. I'm just looking down the back now to see whether or not I've missed anything. I'm sure I have missed things, but that's a reasonably good starting list.
Yeah, look, I think it's just helpful to point out that it's not that we've just done the strategy and now we've got some work to do. There's a lot of work that's already underway as well. So thank you, Natasha. Questions? Come on, team, don't all hold back. None. Excellent. I just I think again it's helpful to point out, as Councillor McCann did in his intro, that we have gone through a lot of workshops and briefings, and obviously what you're seeing with no questions around the table is the fact that the team have been incredibly well briefed by staff, and obviously the pieces of work that we've got before us are very informative as well in terms of the work that's been done. So with that, can we look for someone to move the recommendations on page 378? Councillor McCann, thank you, as indicated, seconded by Councillor Compton. And again, right of introduction.
Thank you very much. Look, unlike the last piece of work where we have to read some really sobering statistics and recognise that there is massive hurt in the community, and will be ongoing hurt and damage done unless we take action. This strategy helps us to make a difference to alleviate some of that hurt. And as Councillor Hanford eloquently points out, to make sure that future generations are being considered. I think the Chair also very cleverly points out that we have been running, walking, crawling all at the same time. And it has put a tremendous amount of stress on the staff, some of which I have caused and for which I publicly apologise, but it's for the greater good. And if you don't understand that, please watch Star Trek. Star Wars. It is really important that the public do understand that while we have been working on this document to ensure that it's enshrined and helps us deliver the best results, and as Natasha has talked about, focus on the areas where it can make a difference. Staff have been working on fixes throughout our district. We have to acknowledge that there is a whole lot of work that combines in this area, and they've been working on all of it. And the growth strategy, where we have acknowledged that we need to grow, to echo Councillor Compton's points. We can't avoid it, and it is something the public really need to understand. Growth happens to you, or you can prepare for it. And in this case, we not only have to rectify decades of underinvestment in housing, but we actually need to prepare for growth that is coming whether we want it or not. So that growth strategy is massively important, as is the tremendous amount of work that staff have done on the district plan and the second version to ensure that we have the rules in place that can allow for this growth. And while Councillor Compton and Hanford and myself wanted us to go further in some of those areas, we have to admit, or I will admit, that it is a huge step forward for our community that says housing rights are more important than some of the amenities that have existed in our community in the past. So I would just like to again thank the staff who have worked terrifically hard on this, especially Natasha and Steve in the back there. All the people who have fed into this, and that includes the bravery of those people who are homeless, who have met quite regularly with Steve and myself and other staff members to make sure that we understand the whole spectrum of hurt that has been caused, and that we can hopefully play a role in fixing. And in that, there are some really important points that Natasha has brought to our attention that we as a council know is that we are not the only people responsible for this, and we're not the only people who can play a role in fixing and ensuring the housing continuum can get working again. We have to advocate to government, we have to advocate to developers, we have to bring the community with us so that they understand that the excuses, or NIMBYism as I call it, are things of the past, and that there is a far greater good in ensuring that people are housed and well housed. So I encourage everyone to support this really, really bold piece of work. And I also hope that future councillors will understand that this council and these councillors have been brave and that they need to continue this work. Because while we've achieved some great results, most of them the public are probably unaware of at the moment, there needs to be decades more of this work. The housing crisis is not over. There were some comments that we heard online earlier. There are decades worth of the housing crisis to come. And every time you think about that, then listen to some of the chair's words that he read out today, or delve back into this report to see the hurt and suffering that lack of housing causes. So with that small opus of a speech, I commend this work and commend what the staff have achieved.
Thank you, Rob. Councillor Compton.
Kia ora. Yeah, so I think it's quite pertinent to pick up on what Councillor McCann was just talking about in terms of that the housing crisis isn't over, and we're not going to magically resolve it in the next few years. It's going to take decades to actually rectify it, because it took decades for us to dig ourselves into this hole. And if I can paraphrase the idiom made famous by the chief of the Prussian General Staff, Helmuth von Moltke the Elder, which is no strategy survives first contact with the enemy. And the enemy, in terms of housing affordability in Aotearoa, for the last 50 years has been ever more restrictive planning regulations. And this was really vividly illustrated last month by the Infrastructure Commission when they released their report around what's been driving housing affordability in New Zealand. And they made the point that worsening housing affordability was never inevitable. We made it so. And this is from the press release on the release of that report, where they say, until the 1970s, city councils actively encouraged population growth, both at the fringe of the cities and in established suburbs. Cars became more affordable, and urban roads were paved and improved, allowing people to travel further, faster, and boosting development of new suburbs. Council plans facilitated infill housing prior to the 1970s, but started to limit it after that point. Planning began to focus less on facilitating growth and planning infrastructure, and more on maintaining the character of existing neighbourhoods by stopping the construction of blocks of flats and apartments. Now, that should sound very familiar to all of us, because we've seen that debate play out down the road in Wellington. We're seeing that debate play out here now in Kāpiti with the National Policy Statement on Urban Development and the Medium Density Residential Housing Standards. We're seeing it play out right now with elements of the community mobilising against a development on Kāpiti Road, where they have claimed it's not within walking distance of any community services. Well, it's 800 metres down the road from a service station, a New World, a Mitre 10, there's 2 churches in walking distance, I think, there's a vets. There's ridiculous excuses that people make to oppose housing growth. So the challenge is, with this strategy, it is a fantastic strategy. It's not going to fix things overnight. But what's really important is the implementation of it, and that this table and future iterations of this table, whatever form they take after local government reform and whatnot has taken place, stay the course and have the courage to keep addressing this for decades to come, because that's what it's going to take to get us out of the mess that we've found ourselves in. We had a quick sugar hit, as that the Infrastructure Commission talked about, in terms of going for ever-growing urban sprawl. That was the sugar hit of personal transport through cars, the paving of roads. It all looked great and wonderful. But the benefits of that died about 10 or 20 years ago when simply roads couldn't handle all the increased traffic anymore, and we hadn't kept public transport keeping pace with it. So a lot of the parts of the strategy that we need to be for it to be successful might be out of our hands, but the bits of it that we can advocate for, we need to advocate for it fiercely. The bits of it that we can control, we need to make sure that we stay the course on it so that we can address it. Because as I said in the previous debate, better things are possible, but the onus is on us as decision makers to have the courage to stay the course, to make sure that the Kiwi dream of being able to not only buy a house, but actually have a roof over your head stays intact for generations to come.
Thanks, Gwen. Councillor Halliday.
Yeah, by crikey, got to follow that one again, Jackie. I understand how you feel. Through you, Mr. Chair. Look, I've left all the eloquent praise giving to my fellow councillors, but first I want to acknowledge the words of my fellow councillors, but also acknowledge Councillor Coots with regards to their emotive response to reading this information. I very much, even just you repeating that information sort of invokes that response. And also how we experience that in our day-to-day roles within our community as well. Look, I've taken a little bit of a different approach. I'd like to acknowledge the work from the Kāpiti Coast Communities Housing Trust Task Force that started in 2018. I want to read out their names, the chair being Paul Hughes, Secretary Mary Sketchley, there's Sue Emirelli, John Hayes, David Scott, Teresa Hines, the late Trevor Daniels, Kevin Burrows, Shone McNeil, Angie Garncross, the Reverend Brian Hooper, Jolene McVoy, Birdie McCoy, the late Dermot Whelan and Cindy Foote. This was instigated by our Mayor Guru at the time, and it was perhaps a sluggish start to the moving forward in this space, but it certainly made me aware of the issue, which I incorporated as part of the campaign of coming into council. I'm very proud of the fact that this triennium, it was made a front and centre issue by this table, and that council has responded magnificently, in my opinion. And I'd like to thank all officers involved that have helped drive this forward, this and other important results around it. There has been immense work done behind the scenes, and it is now becoming more publicly visible, finally, which is great, so that that acknowledgement can be appreciated by the community. I also acknowledge our three iwi partners, Ngāti Raukawa and Ngā Hapu o Ōtaki, Te Atiawa ki Whakarongotai, and Ngāti Toa Rangatira with Hapu Ngāti Haumia. But Rob, you have been the community champion in this space. Your tenaciousness has been inspiring, and I want to thank you very, very much with regards to the continuous push that you have done to get us to this space. I would be remiss not to point out that KCDC was recently successful in a bid to the $1 billion infrastructure fund for infrastructure spending in Ōtaki for 200 houses by being shortlisted. And ups to Darren, Steve Flood, Natasha and the team in this space. But it just goes to show that we're already seeing results based on that information that we've now been able to supply to government, which in just not a short time ago we would not have been able to do. I may have the portfolios of health and seniors, but if we get housing right, this supports so many aspects of well-being and living with respect or in a mana-enhancing way, but it is complex. But as Councillor Khan has said, now is the time for doing. So thank you very much, and I look forward to being a part of that doing as we all move forward.
Thank you, Martin. And just to clarify, we're through to the next stage, so not quite there yet in terms of the infrastructure fund. But I appreciate your enthusiasm, Martin. We'll take that. Mayor Guru.
Yeah, I didn't want to speak on this matter because it's been spoken of quite eloquently by others. But having Councillor Holiday raise the issue of the task force that started the work, the first triennium that I was mayor, it's important to note that Councillor Holiday said the start was sluggish. It was sluggish because it wasn't council's main responsibility as such at that time. What has turbocharged this is government legislation. when the national policy statement on urban capacity was done, that required all councils to look at the capacity they've got in terms of land that's available. That was central government pressure on local authorities that started to shift this. It then became national policy statement on urban development, second stage of the turbocharge. And we were at that point being able to then, council staff were obliged to pick up on this, and the pressure that's been able to be applied has been much more effective. So credit where credit is due. The work that, this issue is too big. It has always been too big for councils to handle. But the government legislation has pushed us. And I suppose the medium density housing changes on top of that have come. It is pushing us even more and causing us to actually review what we've already done. But there is an area which I will talk about in another paper that's coming up, that housing at all costs is also needs to be balanced in terms of what the environment can have the capacity to take. That is critical, but that's a topic to be discussed later. And I thank Councillor Holliday for mentioning the names of these original people. I think it's important. And so I think it'll be useful at this stage for the Mayor's office to say, given the amount of work that was done, to review the original set of recommendations that was made by the task force and sending them a letter of thank you for the work that's already been done to meet those. Thank you.
Thank you, Guru. I don't see any further lights up, so I'm going to go. Oh, sorry, it wasn't showing on my screen. Deputy Mayor Holborough, and then to Councillor McCann, I think, for a right of reply.
Sorry, I too was not going to speak on this, being aware that there would be a couple of lengthy speeches which have been excellent and have highlighted in a really powerful way what we're facing and the work we're going to do to address that. What an incredibly powerful report, having these two back to back, so we can understand the depth and the significance of the crisis that we're in, and then another report in the same agenda which says how we're going to take steps to address it. So I just want to congratulate staff and everyone who've contributed, and I particularly want to acknowledge Councillor Coots for sharing that story, because when we were talking about this, there actually was a discussion about prioritising outcomes for tangata whenua. And I'm so happy that we have that within this report in such a strong way. And that's partly because we had that work in the needs assessment to base that on. And though we're facing a housing crisis, and we do need to be bold, and we do need to take action, and our planning rules in the past have stymied that, still the strategy talks about holistic well-being, living well, not just having a roof over your head, but a good quality of life. It talks about sustainability and resilience of ecological systems, which the Mayor has mentioned. So it does have that wider, holistic approach, how housing fits into people's lives and into our environment. So just huge congratulations to the team and to Rob for championing this. So, I'll certainly be supporting this, and really great to be finally putting the pedal to the floor on this issue.
Thanks, Janet. I don't see any hands up online either, so I'm going to move to Councillor McCann for a right of reply, and then we're going to put it to the vote.
The Deputy Mayor has challenged me by suggesting that my first speech was lengthy, so strap in. But actually, it's not. I think the words from fellow councillors have been very eloquent. Councillor Halliday, thank you for mentioning the mayoral housing task force. That was certainly in my notes, that there are many people in our community who have fought to raise this issue to our attention. And past councils throughout New Zealand, and many of our community, we know from the surveying that we've done and the consultation, think that is not our responsibility, but it is our responsibility to play a part and a role. And this strategy outlines where we can most effectively do that and it really does acknowledge that there are a significant number of other partners that we have to work with. So it is partnership. I think the points that people have made, that it's not just about a roof over their head, are very well made in these reports. There is so much that flows from there, and as we talked about before, Growing Well, that document clearly illustrated that we are concerned about making sure that everything works within our environment. So I would just like to commend everyone for the work that they've done. It's highly inappropriate to give gifts, but I don't care. So if you could pass that round to Natasha, who is ending who is ending her career with us. 82%. You probably need to see who that's originally from, because I would hope that in your next role you'll continue to advocate for government investment, and Grant Robinson, who originally had that bottle and has signed it, needs to make sure that the government coffers are opened up in this very, very important area, and there just has to be more investment into social housing. And as we just need to keep remembering, this housing continuum, where you affect one person, it begins to flow on and affect the next person. And our community needs to understand that when a house is built for someone who's wealthy and they move out of their old house, it frees up another house. Everything is interrelated in this catastrophe, as Councillor Compton so eloquently put it. And we have to do everything that we can. The only last person I wish to thank, and I wasn't going to raid my whiskey, is for Steve Flood, who's worked so tirelessly in this area. And there are many staff who are still involved, and there's too long a list. I can see someone sitting right next to them. But I just do want the community to know that just because we've signed off the report hasn't mean that we haven't been working as hard as we can for the last 2 years. The Mayor's quite right that there is a number of strategic documents that the government have put in place that have helped force council's hand. But as Councillor Compton has said many times before, and I've reiterated it, we chose not to take those steps ourselves as well. Generations of people have chosen not to do anything about this issue. We're choosing now to make sure that what we've seen in the past is no longer acceptable, and that we are going to take action. The challenge now is to make sure that no one drops the ball and decides that this is too hard or not our role. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those against? That's carried. Echo the thanks that councillors have given to staff, and I probably just want to note that the job is not done. It's only just begun. I was thinking of going to a short break, but I can see that Claire is in the room, and I hope with elected members' help that we will get through this next piece relatively quickly and then maybe take a short break. So I'll just invite Claire up to the, or staff up to the table. Thanks, Natasha. You do realise she's going to have to put that on the gift register now.
One, you can't hear me. I would just be careful drinking it, because it has
a concern we can all share about ourselves.
All right, over to Ms McDougall. Item number 8.4, page 420.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Through you, Morena koutou. Claire Iwi and I will take a team approach to taking you through this paper today. Claire is here to answer all the hard questions, so don't make her trip a wasted trip. Make sure there are some for her. Today we bring forward a paper in relation to the Social Investment Fund, with the key purpose to seek the committee's endorsement of several steps as we continue to progress the current 3-year round of social investment funding. The decisions that we seek from you are confirmation of our proposed approach of using the year 1 funding for the specific Ōtaki fund that you established in the LTP, to establish the priorities for that fund moving forward, recognising that unlike the district-wide fund that has been in place for some years and was subject to a lot of work to set the priorities, there are no specific priorities yet established for that fund. The other decision that we seek from you today is to agree the makeup of a panel who would select the members of the independent assessment panel for the district-wide social investment program work over the coming months. I think the issues in relation to these 2 decisions that we seek from you today are outlined in the paper, and with that we're happy to take the paper as read and to answer any questions that you might have.
Thanks, Janice. Any questions from elected members and online? Councillor Halliday.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Look, my apologies, maybe it was late when I was reading this, but I found the paper just a little bit confusing in some aspects. But first of all, let's just get some clarity. We've got how much is the overall social investment fund? Is that 370 or 390,000 per annum?
375, I think, but I'll get Claire to confirm that.
I'm pretty sure it's 345 district-wide and 50 for Ōtaki.
Specific.
I'm under the impression there's a ring-fenced portion of this as well around, I think it was surf lifesaving, and I think it was transport to hospital. I think that was the case. Is that on top of this?
That's on top of that. So that was removed from the overall budget for the fund at the time that it was agreed that those activities would not be subject to the social investment criteria.
That's fine. I was just seeking clarity on that. The 50,000 that's been that we've agreed to in the long-term plan, is this on top of the 370 or 395 figure that we're talking to at the moment? It's on top of that. So we've got the 50 that's in relation to Ōtaki, and was that towards the youth investment?
Just to clarify, there's $50,000 that's to developing a youth space, and you will be briefed on that in the coming months, and that's separate.
That's
and then
cool.
there's the $50,000 for social investment initiatives, which was in response to submissions through the long-term plan process around things like driver's licensing and so forth.
Yeah.
And then there's the remaining $345,000, of which we've had a recent paper on in terms of the proposals that have come forth throughout the district.
Yeah, we've already done that one. So this is obviously the next tranche, heading towards the next 3-year tranche of this as well. Right, okay, that's cool. That's it from my end. Thank you very much. I just wanted some clarity around that.
Thanks, Martin. Councillor Elliott.
Much in the same vein, I was just querying clarity around the 50,000 that was in this for Ōtaki, this place-based through the LTP. That's a one-off or not?
It's an ongoing budget.
Ongoing budget for
$50,000 per annum, specific to Ōtaki initiatives as part of the social investment program.
For 3 years, or how long?
It's definitely in for the 3 years of this program, but I think the budget continues into the future as well.
Thank you. And should other ward councillors wish to lobby for a place-based grant for social initiatives for their area, they would have to do that through the LTP.
The LTP would be the appropriate place for the council to consider whether or not there were specific social needs, or, as was the case for Ōtaki, well-known equity issues that warranted a dedicated fund akin to what this table agreed for Ōtaki.
Thank you so much.
Deputy Mayor Holborough.
Thank you. Happy to be on the panel to select these people. So with the people who apply to the district-wide fund and the Ōtaki fund, I'm assuming this is project-based funding, and we all know what I think about that. I think people should be able to apply for operational funding. But assuming this is project-based funding, would we ensure that the same applicants, the same organisation could apply to the Ōtaki fund and the district-wide fund, but not for the same project? I'm just thinking if you have a $30,000 project and you applied to both funds.
This is one of the reasons we'd like to set up a panel to actually work out what those priorities should be. So currently we have the 3 priorities of connected communities, building capacity for the social sector and safety. And so to address the inequities, we really need to research what those inequities are and then decide what the principles and the priorities should be. So I would think that it will be something completely different. So if an organisation has an idea of how they could address that, I don't think there would be a problem with them coming into both, because the Ōtaki specific will have its specific priorities.
Ms McDougall's just going to add something to that as well.
Just to be clear, the decisions that we're asking for today are to agree who will select the panel for assessing the applications to the district-wide fund, and to agree that that the year 1 funding for the Ōtaki specific fund be focused on setting some priorities, and the process that we would go through to establish those priorities, whether it was to establish a panel or something else, we would bring that back to you later this financial year before that work got started, so that you could endorse the process at that point.
Thank you, and apologies if I drifted slightly off topic.
Right, I don't see any further questions, so I'm going to move recommendations A and B, found on page 420 of the report. Councillor McCann's indicated to see he's happy to second that, and so I'll just open and then we'll move into debate. I think it goes without saying that the work that we've done, and having been involved in the step change around the district-wide fund, has certainly been beneficial, even though some within the district felt a bit of hurt at the time when funding that they'd annually relied on was then distributed differently. Well, we've certainly seen the benefits from that step change. I think what we see here is another step change where we have identified need within the district in a specific area. And if I refer back to my comments around the other 2 reports that we've got on today, you cannot deny the facts, and they're outlined in the report in terms of the level of deprivation and need within specifically Ōtaki. So again, was very careful to say that's not to say there isn't need in other pockets within the district, but the report certainly didn't highlight they were at the same level or intensity as they were in Ōtaki, hence the request in response to submissions through the long-term plan for this place-based funding. So I'm pleased to see this here today, but I do want to remind elected members of the concerns or criticism that was raised at the time around that specific funding, to go back and read that report and to see the level of deprivation within the community, and as we've talked about housing, to not only consider that today but to consider that next year and the year after, because this is going to take some time to address. If there's a discussion for place-based funding for other areas in the district, then healthy discussion, but I would say that would need to be backed up by information for the rationale behind that, and I think that that's healthy in terms of having that discussion. So I'm going to put that to open that up for debate, and I've got Councillor McCann up first.
Kia ora, and thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to echo your words and agree with everything that you said. The issue here is for councillors to wear their regional hat, not perhaps just looking at their own neck of the woods and thinking that we could do with some money for this or that project. This is to do with significant equity in issues across our region. if I could just remind councillors of one of the stories that fed into the long-term plan, which was to do with just trying to get licences. It is very different for a student in Paraparaumu to get a licence than one in Ōtaki, because the services are just not as available. And if you look at all the courses around New Zealand that are trying to get young men and women into work, one of the things that most of them focus on is ensuring they've got access to transport and licences. And Ōtaki misses out on both. And this is just one small example where we need as councillors to go, what is best for our whole region, not just where I come from and not just my experiences. So I really do commend this work. It is trying to right some of the wrongs that are occurring and ensure that we all get that step up so that we're able to see across the fence and at the same height. It's not a freebie or anything to one part of our community. It is about equity. Thank you.
Councillor Compton.
Thank you. I just want to quickly acknowledge not just the work of staff in overseeing and looking after the social investment program that we have, but also want to acknowledge all the people who came to speak to us during the long-term plan process last year and spoke at length and with deep emotion about the issues that they see and that many of them deal with on a day-to-day basis in Ōtaki. And Andy Fraser from Ōtaki College pops to mind, and his really impassioned pleas to us to do more to help the rangatahi of Ōtaki access the opportunities that will help ensure that they don't get caught up in intergenerational cycles. Was, I think, really important. But importantly, I actually want to acknowledge your leadership and advocacy for this, Councillor Coates. I think you pushed the council to do more on this space, and we responded. And you know, it's a fantastic. Whatever you decide to do this year, I think it's a fantastic legacy that you've helped to lift the profile of Ōtaki in this regard and the level of support the council provides to that community.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Actually, completely echoing Councillor Compton's words, Councillor Coates, with regards to the efforts up in Ōtaki. Ōtaki is changing very, very quickly, and very, very quickly. And it's important that all the opportunities there are available for everybody, and we need to assist in that area as well. Look, I support all the words that have been said so far, but I just wanted to wave the flag a little bit, following in with what Councillor Halborough was talking towards with regards to specific organisations within our community who missed out on funding when this all changed, and just wave the flag for the Citizens Advice Bureau. There's maybe one or two agencies that we could perhaps look at helping out. I appreciate this is not the space for that conversation at the moment, just waving the flag for it at the moment, and I'll leave that conversation perhaps for a later stage. But certainly this will be getting my support moving forward.
Was that the surrender flag or...? Just kidding. Who do I have? I haven't got any other names up on the screen. I'm just checking what's on. Have we still got people online? We do. Excellent. And so, look, with that, right of reply, look, thanks for the comments, but more importantly, thanks for your votes. Because the first thing's an idea, the second thing is actually having the support around the table. And so we've seen that with the housing stuff, and I think equally when we've seen issues of deprivation, no doubt there'll be other issues that come to the table for other areas within the district as well. And I just encourage councillors to make the right decision at the right time. So with that, I'm going to put that to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Against. That is carried. So team, I want to check in with you all. It's 12:20. We can stop, have lunch, or we can box on and get the last part of the paper done and then have lunch. So what do you want to do? Box on? Do you want a short 5-minute toilet stop and then box on? Yep. Okay, right. So we will stop for 5 minutes and then we'll get back and grab yourself a coffee, and then we'll finish off the last part of the meeting.